Hey, my name is Tom Tolman, and I am also a member of the Library Board of Trustees. Kind of thinking the least important member of the board, but welcome to the second installment of the Summer Forum series. Tonight's forum is about the history of Tolman Pond. I am pretty fond of Tolman Pond myself, having been born and raised there, and I still presently live there. No plans of leaving anytime soon. It's a wonderful place with 4 wonderful seasons filled with wonderful activities. Lately, I've been thinking winter is my favorite season, though. Tonight's speaker is my mom, Karen Tolman, who has lived at Tolman Pond for, I believe, 44 years, and is basically the main reason that it survives the way that it does to this day. She has put her heart and soul into the local community over there, and we all greatly appreciate it. She is now going to give you a presentation about the history of it all. Thank you and enjoy yourselves.
Wow. Thank you for coming, everybody, on this hot, hot night, and I warn you that I'm totally out of my comfort zone up here, but I'll do my best to talk about a place that I've now known for nearly 45 years, ever since I...
Can you move the mic closer?
Good?
That's better.
All right. So I'll do my best, even though this is totally out of my comfort zone, to talk about a place that I've now known for 45 years, ever since I married Barry. And I think most of you know Barry. He's hiding over there. I thought he'd be in the back, but there he is over there. And you may not know Ren Tolman, but I'd like to introduce you to Ren, who's hiding over there. Ren is Barry's only first Tolman cousin, and they're sort of the same vintage. It was good vintage. So when I married Barry, I also married this place we call Tolman Pond because, like an appendage, it simply came with him. And there are others here tonight who do a much better job up here because they actually lived part of these times I'll be talking about. So I hope we'll have a chance to hear some of their lively anecdotes, as one of the press releases said. And I don't know who wrote that. I think Laurie probably did. But my presentation is a bit more about the historical background of Tolman Pond. So I met Barry, a little bit about me first, in 1967 at a barn dance, what we used to call square dances in Dublin, New Year's Eve party. Dublin's my hometown. And this is relevant only because Barry called me a couple of days later to ask me out on a ski date. And as you'll learn, skiing is a big part of Tolman Pond's history. And in fact, I need to start running this. Here's Barry arriving on skis. You can see the little guy in there. See his skis? There he is.
Oh,
He's got his spill cap on. And here he is a couple years later, a toddler with his father, Fran. I might go back to the other one. The birth announcement was a block print by Barry's father, Fran, and I'll be showing several of those tonight throughout the presentation. So I think Barry wanted to perhaps show off a little bit on our first date, and I hadn't skied much, and once we got to the top of the hill, he asked me to ski down ahead of him so that he could show me how it was supposed to be done. And so he didn't tell me that there was a little rise on the hill and he planned to jump off it. I guess he wanted to demonstrate his old ski jumping days at Dublin School. Anyhow, I watched him come down and I said, wow, this cuts a pretty nice figure. And then he soared off that little rise, and I kid you not, right in front of me, both skis fell off midair. That was our first date. And then a few years later, this little guy was born. Oh, cute. The 7th generation Nelson Tolman, 6th generation Tolman Ponder. And now, 42 years later, as he said, as a trustee of the Nelson Library, he asked me to talk tonight. And so, how could a mother possibly So Ma and Pop Tolman, I've put together this PowerPoint using the photographs that we have to help tell the story of the business that grew from the boarding house that Ma and Pop, who are Barry and Ren's grandparents, began at least 100 years ago and ran into the 50s or perhaps even later. But first to further set my stage, I came onto the scene in 1969, and you'll look at the best man here. Whoops, what is that? We gotta go back. Wait. Here's the best man. How do I do? And anyway, unlike me with nary a dowry, even though I came from Dublin, Barry, as I've said, came into our marriage with this appendage, a whole host of wedding presents to share with me, and things that were already pretty well settled into life at Tolman Pond, where we were going to live. And foremost, 3 wonderful children, there's Bee on the left, and Ebenezer and Stacia, who's here tonight. And then we added Tom to the picture, all to grow up happily together. Barry's father, Fran, had just recently died, just before we were married, in fact. And it was Fran's illness and ultimate death that brought Barry back home to live, because home was really going to need him. And Barry's mother, my mother-in-law, was still very much alive and lived on the property until the ripe old age of 100, in fact. And she oversaw everything that everyone did via various methods. And one particular method was through field classes from her perch on the hill above the pond. And as a new young bride, this is sometimes what it felt like. So Barry had also inherited 7 tenant families in their camps, and we still have 5 of them. And it was his task now to pretty much help manage those camps. And so here they are. Some were pretty rustic, small cabins built in the 1920s, but somewhat upgraded by these pictures, built around the pond, back in the woods, in which the same tenants had been summering for a long time, and in some cases, generations. Barry also had a year-round rental house we called the Skillen House that had once belonged to Pop Tolman's sister, Grace Skillen. And I've heard that Pop and Grace didn't get along all that well, and so peculiar things did occur, and Barry wanted to relay a little bit of a story. Can you do that, Barry? Or are you too gun-shy to do that? Right now? Right now. Get up.
Okay, I'll try. I guess the story is about a spring that is right on the boundary line between this house and the house that my grandparents lived. And as I understand it, they decided jointly to dig a spring for drinking water. So they sunk like a 6 or 8 foot square cistern into the ground, which beautiful spring water came out of. And the idea was that we were going to share this, my grandparents and Grace here own this place, we're going to share this spring. So that's good. And but they were very persnickety about boundary lines and who owned what. So the spring was built right on, it split the boundary line. The boundary line split the spring. So the Skillen property owned the eastern end of the spring cistern, and the Tolman family owned the western end, and 2 hatches in the top. So that the Skillen end came in from this side, east side. Tolman end came in from the west side, and there was a partition right down this spring. Beautiful spring water, cold, crystal clear. We were instructed we go over and get our spring water from our side, and our own hatch flipped up like this. Skillens flipped up like that. There was a partition down the middle. went only down about 2 feet and was all open underneath. You never do, forever. Skillen water and Tolman water might taste the same. I guess that's the story.
So, but the cream of the crop of Barry's wedding presents was this old farmhouse where we then lived. And here's a photo by Harriet Wise, who's a longtime friend and longtime Tolman ponder and professional photographer now in Maryland. And she made this postcard to help us celebrate the farmhouse's 200th birthday. Now, Rick Church, is Rick here? Rick Church has, one of our town historians has, let's see, we celebrated that in 1991. And Rick Church, one of our town historians, recently questions that date based on his deed research. But sorry, Rick, we had already celebrated with the party and the parade. We dubbed it Our Lady of Perpetual Maintenance. Here's one of our participants. And here they are doing their Mop and Bucket Brigade dance. Putting Jack in the Green, getting everyone for their money here. So back to the farmhouse. Rick's research thinks that the farmhouse was most likely built around 1805 if it was built by Amos Bryant, but possibly earlier if it was built by someone named Beard. I think that's what he said. But nonetheless, it was acquired by George Tolman in the 1830s. And George was the son of Ebenezer, who was the first Tolman in the area. And today, the timber frame of that old house is still intact, made with hand-hewn 28-foot and 36-foot long 8x12 native spruce beams. I guess they're spruce beams. There's still the 3 chimney fireplace. There's 3 fireplace chimney. That's the central one in the living room. And its oven is intact, but no longer used for its original purpose. That's it. And we think that the clapboard, there may be one original window in the back. It's covered with a storm window, and we think that the clapboards under the porch may be original. They are attached by wrought iron nails, which may in time help us narrow down the actual construction date. So the farmhouse had over the years become a patchwork quilt of construction, evolving from home to boarding house and eventually to its present 3 apartments, having converted sheds. I think all this middle part here was sheds, having converted them into living quarters in order to enlarge the capacity of it as a boarding house. When we were married, the little apartment up here was rented to Walter Campbell, an architect from Boston, Cambridge, who came up on weekends. I think his son and daughter-in-law are here tonight. The bottom here, what we call the ski room, was rented out to a couple of various families in the summertime, and then we took over the rest of the house here. Today, Tom and Larissa live in the rest of the house. And Kirk lives in the apartment upstairs. And he's performing next weekend. I think he'll take his horns off. In 1969, it seemed as though everything was in need of repair. And today, everything still is in need of repair. But the farmhouse was especially in need of repair. And here's the backside of the farmhouse in the early 1860s. This is a J.A. French stereoscopic slide. Pretty ragged. And here's the front of it. And I just showed this to Linda Willett, who's executive director at Harrisville. She was trying to help date that old Cape part of the house. And this is a landscape from the top of the hill above the farmhouse. This is Herd Hill. Whoops, wait a minute. Herd Hill here, and that's Tolman Pond down here, and Harrisville Pond here, and all facing due south towards the mountain. That's all grown up now. We've gained a little over the years, and here are some wonderful photographs of the farmhouse showing a little of its evolution. This is the sheds in the middle, which were later converted to living quarters. I don't know what this guy's doing, but we think reading a book and maybe boiling down some sap. Farmhouses in the rear. This is when the porch was added. We know that it was there in the early 1900s, 1907 at least. So this may have been later than that. Then this little sitting room was added here. And this funny thing out front here, that's since disappeared. And then this apartment upstairs seemed to come in pieces. Here's the two wings of it. It's later since been added onto in the middle. This area here became living quarters, and then the chimney was built. That's what we call our ski room, part of our ski room. And there the dormers were added. The 4 on the cape and then a couple in the middle. And then here's a little of its attraction to area artists, which I had a hard time not including. Barbara LeSword was a longtime tenant at Tolman Pond. Eva Quigley. Gori Ivanov-Renov was a painter from Dublin. And this actually is a color oil painting that which Floppy used in her book. You'll see a picture of it in color in a minute. Used it as the cover of her book. This is a charcoal painting by Jim Robinson, Uri Jean's brother, when he was at Dublin School, and I just loved that. It's charcoal with a little bit of wash in it. And then Peter Barnett, watercolor. And then of course, Sienna Merrifield Giffen. And Sienna's not here tonight. And then this is a view from Frank Upton's plane. And this is from Google Earth. And if you look closely, you can see Tom and Josh Turnbull, who's Tom's building partner, on the roof there when they shot this. And we figure they're up there to either work on one of the 131 roof pitches on the house or one of its 99 windows. April 2012, I think it was. Google Earth us. So basically, Barry, with me now in tow, was taking on what was left over from Tolman Pond's heyday, as you'll soon hear more about, where most of our tenants were willing to turn a blind eye to its worn-at-the-heels condition, or at least willing to trade in its condition for the community that had developed over the years. So thank you, all you Tolman Ponders. This rainbow reminds us of you. So as far as I know, and I certainly stand to be corrected, this is Ma Tolman, Sadie, Sarah French Tolman, and Pop Tolman, Wayland Parker Tolman. And they were the ones who opened up the farmhouse to boarders at least 100 years ago. And we have an early postcard as witness to early guests dated in 1913. And here's another postcard that was published in 22. And we assume that these were published to attract more guests. We also assume that taking in boarders at that time was a way to make some extra money, because in those days farming was declining and remained subsistence at best. So Ma and Pop created a market for this property on a little pond, and certainly a market for Ma's home-cooked meals. We still have that bowl. And so here's Ma in the kitchen, and here she is with a little bit of help. But I further expect that it was their two very handsome sons, Fran, who was born in 1902, and Newt, who was born in 1908, who were amazingly charismatic, inventive, innovative, talented, creative. I'm sure there were negatives that went along there as well, but a lot of adjectives. And they were able to capitalize not only on their charms, but also on the land, building upon what Ma and Pop had already started. So when they were old enough, they went to work to liven the place up. And they lived away, some they traveled, some, but they both came back home to settle and to work. So to backtrack just a little bit, Ma Tolman, here she is, lived in Milford, New Hampshire, where she was a school teacher. Here she is practicing her skill. And where we assume she met Wayland, who at that time was employed by a furniture shop in Milford. And they were married in Milford on June 23rd, 1896. And that very day took, quote, the last train from Boston for Keene, arriving in Harrisville about 6:15 p.m. Thence they were conveyed by carriage to the residence lately occupied by Orson C. Tolman, who was Wayland's father, which they proposed to make their future home, end quote. So Orson, here's Orson, and here he is in younger days, he was a Civil War vet. And Emily Parker Tolman, with her grandson Fran, who's Barry's father, had lived in Manchester where Wayland was born, but moved to Nelson, where they were promised the farm by George Tolman, Orson's uncle, in exchange for taking care of him for the rest of his life. So all of George's children, at least 6 evidently, had previously died or moved away. So it seems that Wayland and his new bride Sadie were moving in with Wayland's folks to help run the farm. And so eventually Wayland ended up owning the farm when his mother died in 1910. And so Ma became a farmer, something she'd always evidently wanted to be, and a farmer's wife and a mother. And I'm guessing this is a little bit of an aside, but I think it's significant as a teacher that she met Wayland's uncle, Francis Wayland Parker, who was a Civil War vet and a renowned educator, a lieutenant colonel named Francis Wayland Parker, Emily's brother. And here he is. This is a lithograph we have of him that was inscribed to Ma and hung in the farmhouse. The inscription, unfortunately, has been water damaged, so it's no longer there. But Wayland, Pop Tolman, obviously had been named after him, Wayland Parker Tolman. And Ma's oldest son was also named after him, Francis Wayland Parker Tolman. So who was this guy? Yeah. So this is perhaps an indication of the influence that he may have had on Ma, especially when she became a mother. And incidentally, here are 2 grandsons, Wayland, you just met tonight, and Francis. So more to the point of Francis Wayland Parker, he was born in Bedford, New Hampshire in 1857. He was considered the father of progressive education. And when he lived in Chicago, he not only started the Francis Wayland Parker School, which still exists today, but he also mentored John Dewey, who is the progressive educator that most of us are familiar with, the best known spokesperson, at least, and philosopher. So here's Parker in Nelson. And today, in addition to the school in Chicago, there are a few other Francis Wayland Parker schools. But in New Hampshire, there's the Francis Wayland Parker Scholarship Program, which is sponsored by the New Hampshire Association of School Principals. And the topic of the 2012 essay, I don't know if you can read it back there, Francis Wayland Parker is visiting your school and would like to know which of his theories are working well in your school and why. And it's about a $2,000 scholarship, so any of your seniors here, you should check it out. So Newt and Fran, so what may be important here is that it seems that Fran and Newt were probably pretty progressively educated for small-town rural farm boys at that time. But remember that this is also the time that the summer homes were being built. The farmhouse was still welcoming guests. The Pennsylvania, yes, I was going to do that the summertime, you must have seen it. The Pennsylvania settlement artists and scholars were flourishing. And here's a book by Terry Upton, if you want to read more about them. So we expect that Ma was able to embrace the richness of this local exposure, both for her family and certainly for the business that was helping to sustain their lives on the farm. So Ma and Pop invested in their sons. And they returned the favor in spades, and they helped turn Tolman Pond into what today might be called a destination. So here are a few advertisements of that time. Can you read it back there? I won't read it to you. There's an early one. This actually was still, the post office address was Wayland Parker Tolman, Cheshire. Here's a later one. And even a later one, this is a poster like this. This is the top half of the 4 seasons of the year, which Tom mentioned. And here are the seasons, spring, fall, winter, summer. This is quite a fancy poster that they put up. So when Fran and Newt became young men, the farmhouse quickly became a gathering place where both entertainment and good food were plentiful. The good food continued to come from Ma's frugal gourmet kitchen. Mary Shaw, you spent some time in that kitchen.
Many an hour.
Many an hour learning Mary makes the best bread, and you learned it from
I
that.
had to cook these out of the cold room and take these to the refrigerator.
And the entertainment mostly came from Newt and Fran, who by this time, or shortly thereafter, had married equally handsome women. Here's Floppy and Fran. And Newt and Beth. I don't know who the woman, Ren, do you know who that woman is behind them? Sophisticated, no. Sophisticated, educated, urban women who married and moved to the Nelson Woods in the late 20s for Beth and early 30s for Floppy, and who surely added a grand element of style and beauty, and certainly a few more helping hands. Each couple had one son. Newt's very happy. And I'm sure the addition of two healthy boys kept everybody's enthusiasm pretty strong. So even though Fran and Newt were 6 years apart in age and often worked independently from each other while both living on or near the farm, they each seemed to find their own niche, if not sometimes a competitive one. And later, I might note that Newt and his second wife, Janet, eventually bought and moved up the hill to Greengate in the early 1950s, leaving the family business behind while Fran and Floppy stayed behind on the farm. So Fran and Newt excelled in entertaining the guests. Here's a series of ads that Fran did for Wilkins Blended Whiskey ad. And we don't know if he bartered for some whiskey or not. He may have. And Newt and Fran were both very capable musicians. Ma had invested in music lessons for them. And they were involved, if not instrumental, in the dances that still exist right here today in the town hall. Newt played the flute. Fran played the piano. Here he is with Quig and Dudley. And even Pop played the drums. And here's the print we all know. Some years later, Newt collaborated with Kay Gilbert in writing the scores to over 60 tunes. They published as a Nelson Music Collection, and then followed with an LP recording of some of those same tunes. He also wrote about the music of that time in Quick Tunes and Good Times, a musical autobiography of sorts that introduces us to many of the local players. But entertainment extended beyond the music and the dances, however. They played and they gave tennis lessons. They built a tennis court, building on earlier traditions of playing tennis on the lawn in front of the farmhouse. Here's some lawn tennis. Get those tennis dudes. You can see some tennis rackets in there. Later, probably in the 20s or 30s, I don't know when, they built the clay court that exists there today, moved up the hill a little ways, and you might recognize a couple of these pictures. There's Ren. Is that you, Ren? Barbara or Fran? I don't know any of the others.
I think that was Newt and Janet next to
Newt and Janet there.
Yep.
Here's the kids waiting on the sideline. That's John Smith, although he claims he never played tennis. He's just there for the fun. Here's Ren at the court, handsome dude. Here's today's version of Workday at the court, laying down the tapes. We have to do that every year, we have to lay the tapes. And here's Elsa helping out. Bronson, you played some tennis there.
I did. So, you notice that the tennis players in those pictures were wearing some kind of sneakers, blue jeans, and no shirt. That was the crowd for whom playing tennis, the key was how hard could you hit your first serve. Not if you played it or not. How hard could you hit it? but there were some noteworthy players. And I may be on thin ice here. Barry and Randy might have to help me out. So the Nat Niles, who summered here across the pond and was a teacher at Vermont Academy, his father was national champion.
Correct.
Nat Niles, and there's, of course, has been for years, Nat Niles in Dublin would be the third generation. And then there was the Nat Niles who summered across the pond and played tennis, of course, on the court. His father was national tennis champion at Forest Hills. So that was a fairly noteworthy statement. And then the most noteworthy tennis player, of course, was Fran Tolman, but after him would be Sid Partridge. Now Sid is a living proof of the fact that the race doesn't necessarily go to the swift or the talented. The race goes to he who endures. So Sid began to enter the USTA runs National Age Group Championships. And Sid went in the 80 and over. Sid went in the 85 and over. Sid went in the 90 and over. And his one remark about the whole thing that I can remember is that he said that it was not unusual to arrive at the tournament and find that your seating had improved several notches. And you had died.
Okay, thank you for that. So at Tolman Pond, they skied and they gave skiing lessons. They built a ski hill. And then Newt actually built skis, and he had a ski shop. And I'll show you some of the ski photos that we have in a little bit. Here's an ad for skiing. Skiing, and this is in the very first issue of Yankee Magazine in 1936, or one of the first year. You want me to equip you with skis, bindings, poles, boots, and wax, domestic or imported, not to mention mittens, jackets, socks, ski suits, and rucksacks. Ski shop for repairs, instructions available at $1 an hour, either group or individual, teaching for beginners right up to first class. All official tests given. Figure skiing a specialty. Nursery slopes, open country, every variety of woods trail. That's in 1936. And we'll show you some more pictures in a minute there. So Newt also tapped maple trees, and he built a sugar house. Boiled down the sap, he built a sugar house. We'll see that in a minute. Here's Gus in the famous Rolls-Royce pickup truck. Ren, can you tell us about that, or Barry, tell us about that? Tell us about that. Is that the right year? Is that the right year for that truck?
Yeah, well, the way that happened is that, as some of you older people might remember, there was a depression in the 1930s, and as such, big automobiles became a drug on the market, and they sold for nearly nothing. Well, my father always had a hankering for a big car, and he came into a little bit of money. The story about that, there was a guy staying at the farm that ended up to be a screenwriter, and they collaborated on a work of fiction and sold it to the Saturday Evening Post or Collier's or one of the illustrated weeklies. Made a pretty tidy sum of money, whereupon he went to New York and bought a Rolls Royce. And that happened to be a 1923 Silver Ghost, for those of you that car buffs. All right, so that was the first one. This was the second one. This is 1929, actually, Phantom 1. So he drove that up to the war, and then, of course, the gas shortage and all. Neither Newt nor Fran went into the war. They were too old, so Newt took up farming. And he had a pickup truck that broke down. So that Rolls was up on blocks for the duration, but he pressed it into service, cut the body off, and created, you can see there, a pickup. Which is what I learned to drive in. Learned to drive a Rolls. Actually a very practical rig. You'll notice the huge tires and wheels. And in the old days, the roads weren't like they are now. Plow got around after days went by. And they had people to pick up at the train and so on for the business, and these were very practical. They'd go through a lot of snow, a lot of mud in mud season. They were renowned for how good quality, so you virtually had to do no repairs on them. So anyway, that all worked out well until after the war, and then they started to salt the roads. Oh dear, that was the end of the Rolls Royces. There were all this complex mechanical systems underneath that were just gobbled up by the salt. So at that point, he got out of the Rolls Royce business and ended up like all of you driving Subaru.
Okay, Fran and Floppy. They took up riding. Well, actually, I think Floppy had ridden for a long time. So they actually built a stable and a riding ring. They gave lessons. And I don't think they ever jumped, did they, Mary? But this is a wonderful drawing that Fran did. And they both guided for upland game, and they both trained bird dogs. Fran converted the stable into a kennel for his bird dogs, and they each had their own hunting clientele. Here's Newt with his pointer of the day, and Fran with his dog. And here's Fran and some of his clients, and some of his later clients, and I think one is actually here tonight. That guy there, Dix Campbell, is here tonight, and he might have a little bit to contribute to hunting with Fran.
Hunting often was all about numbers, and I got more than you did, so on and so forth. That was a very high point. It was the first time that 4 hunters, all together, Fran, my dad, my younger brother Charlie on the left, me on the right, all got our living on the woodcock. And you'd think that would be a real high point of the day. Nah. Fran had discovered a greenhouse abandoned in the woods. And we opened the day shooting the hell out of it. And then we prepared to the usual lunch, which was always wonderful. Despite the fact that Floppy was what would we call today mathematically challenged. It started out with her thinking she was younger than Fran, I guess, and which we heard later was not true. But if there were 4 hunters, there were 3 eggs, 5 of this, and whatever else. And all delicious, all accompanied by good conversation, but I got a correction about the delicious. The one time that we probably didn't arm wrestle for that last little tidbit, was pointed out by my brother, that day the sandwiches were baked beans and peanut butter. 2 sandwiches, all in one. It impressed.
Okay, and having a little pond in the place, they swam. This is Nancy LeSword and her dog Yubi, wonderful picture. And they boated, old boating postcard. Unfortunately, Fran, when he was his father, when he was a state legislator, passed a bill that banned motorboats on Tolman Pond. It's shallow anyway, but so we boated in rowboats and canoes. And they fished. I think this was at Spoonwood, right? This is Ren and Barry and Newt and Fran. I don't know who the woman is on the right. And Fran even tied flies, and I think one is still replicated today as the Tolman tight, or the Tolman, there's also something called the Tolman's Granite Laker, and I don't know if that had anything to do with Fran or not. So they also, oh yeah, there's a wonderful block print by Fran. Horn pouting. There are no horn pout left. And they ski jored. And we liked it so much, we put the old bombardier to work and ski jored a little bit. And they skated, and I think we know some of those folks here. I think we know that guy. Dave. Dave Paddock, there you are. Ren, Barry, Fran, is that Susie Paddock? So we skated too. And this actually, not a great picture, but I included it because it was taken in 1971 or 2, the day after Thanksgiving.
Wow.
And now we don't get ice until January. And they snowshoed, as further evidenced by the snowshoes hanging in the barn. And then they built the camps I spoke of earlier. There were, I think, 10 at one time. We still have 5. 4 of which are still occupied by the extended families of those earlier tenants. I think some here tonight. And here's one here tonight, Georgia. She's on the right there. Who's here tonight? Georgia's grandchildren are now this camp's 6th generation, the Vincent camp. And they visit as much as they can. And here's Clark Muller, the little guy there with his sister and father and floppy driving, and Clark is here tonight. Where's Clark? There he is. Whose parents once and grandchildren, children, and his wife, of course, now very much enjoy Tolman Pond. And here's who I thought was Mary. I guess it's Brooke, her sister. It's such a great picture, I had to include it. And Brooke's mother still spends her summer on Tolman Pond, and her sister and her nephews still come to Tolman Pond. And in fact, where's Marty? Her grandparents came to Tolman Pond. Not to Tolman Pond, to Hardin's.
And when we started off, my parents started coming up to one of Ethan Tolman's, one of his father, Gordon Tolman's camps that they shared with Walter Hall. Some of you might have known Walter Hall in the old days. And then we moved to one of Roger Tolman's camps, Harvey's father. And then we moved to many different places.
And Tolman Pond.
And this was your...
This is the one we tore down.
Yes, exactly, where your house is.
Where our house is now.
Yeah.
So additionally, the camps didn't have any plumbing, we're told. So bathing, probably in the pond, but possibly here. Or here. And meals were taken at the farmhouse. And it wasn't unusual for Ma, in her sitting room, many of you probably visited her there, and her trusty helper, Mabel Curtis, and you'll hear a little bit more about Mabel in a minute, to feed as many as 30 or 40 people at a sitting. And I think they ate pretty well. And here's, I don't know if this was really a Sunday dinner, but it's a great photo. But this is a dinner inside, and I can look at, I see Mary there, Kitty, Ma Tolman, Ren, Bobby. Is that Schubrick? Where's Lynn? Is that Schubrick? Hallie up there. And you might also look at, Fran had a habit of painting on walls, and unfortunately a lot of those were not salvageable. The wonderful murals that he painted. So the family also hosted a 4th of July picnic for the neighborhood, which continues today. The Vincent girls, this is Tom Murray's mother. Tom and Linda are not here tonight. And Georgia, your mother, Bill, Judy Waterston, she may not be here. Her mother. Anyway, the Vincent girls all have family living in the area still today. We'll learn more about Uncle Bill in a minute. Now this is Jim Robinson, Mary Shunk's brother, and Jonathan Smith at a 4th of July party in, what, the 60s?
1962.
1962, that's Jonathan there. He's a tall then, he's still tall today. And this is July 4th, 1972. Here's Mary Shunk with her firstborn, Dana. This is Stacia at the back of Station. Tom Tolman, who was just a toddler. And I think that that's actually Seth Tolman.
Yeah.
And occasionally we dress up on the 4th, and here's Bonnie, Riley, and her Nigerian friend, Benedict. And Floppy liked to dress up with her famous bowler hat, derby. And this was the red, white, and blue year, 1976. Tom was leading the parade. He was a couple years old, and he was towing this wagon, in which, I think this was the beginning of the Nelsontown Band, right, Dave? Here's Dave, inspiration behind the Nelsontown Band. Harry Suttonfield, B, and one of the Sanchez girls, and then Newt on the penny whistle behind it. All dressed in red, white, and blue. And then July 4th canoe, sorry, Margaret. We often have a canoe race. I think this is George Riley. Is that George Riley?
Yeah.
I don't know what happened here. And a 2000 photo by Harriet Wise. Here's the old Plymouth that Barry had. Our son-in-law has it now. And here's Floppy. She was close to 100 then. And many friends that you'll recognize. And then a few years later, the same gathering. Barry says the older he gets, the longer the fuse gets. Longer time to get up and out of the way. And evening comes, July 4th, 2013, photo by Richard. So Fran and Newt and now their wives somehow attracted the guests into helping out. They were able to turn work into play. They were very clever at that. And so the kids loved to go on trips to the on-the-premises dump in those days where they could throw and break the bottles on the big rock over the bank, obviously before waste management. Everyone loved to help milk the cows and deliver the milk. Here's Harriet, she's our photographer. Bobby Curtis, Jim, I guess the horse. Anyone else you recognize? They'd fish for supper, help put food on the plate. They make ice cream on Sundays and press cider with Bobby Curtis and Foster Sisson. And Bobby Curtis, whose mother was Mabel, who was the woman who was Ma Tolman's right-hand man, right-hand lady, were quite an amazing couple, and Barry actually wanted to speak a little bit about them. I'll show Bobby later, who helped us out on the farm for many years. Now.
I just want to talk a little bit about the Curtises because I think it's remarkable what they did. These were people lived right over here. And when I first met when I was a little fellow, they lived in a shack on Osgood Hill, just the side of where the Jesuits live now. A shack is, to call it a shack is very complimentary. There's a pile of boards with a hole. And they went to work for my family, my grandparents, Mabel and Bobby here. And Bobby was a little fellow. And somewhere along the line, my grandfather, there was some property over there for sale. And basically he bought it for him and said, okay, I'll buy this property, you move in, you work for us, Bobby and his mother, and until it's paid off, and then you own it. And they did. They worked 365 days a year, both of them, mother and son. No holidays, no Sundays, no 4th of July, no vacation, no sick time, no nothing. And they bought that property and paid it off if there was, how the finances worked, I have no idea. But, and they were doing menial labor. I mean, she was washing dishes and peeling potatoes. Bobby was, as you see, swinging a scythe. Neither one of them drove. And they paid for that property in like, I think, 10, 12 years. And today, it's 100, like 100 acres, owned by like 7 different people, right over here on the Henderson Road. And they did that on a handshake. There may have been some sort of a contract or something, but this was in the late 40s, early 50s. And pure and simple, handshake deal. I'll buy the property, you move in tomorrow, you live there, you work for us till it's paid off, then you own it. Pure and simple. Bobby and Mabel did that. And Bobby's brother, Graham, called him, and father, George, and along with they lived there. They didn't contribute much except a little local color. But
That today is the house of where Bobby and Mabel live, where Elizabeth Hewitt lives. Now that was the house and all the property that
the
went.
location.
The location, yeah, not the house. She yeah. And
Um,
it included the property across the road where I think Bud and Kelly now own, across the state road where Ada owns. It was about 100 acres.
So anyway, I don't know the arithmetic, but Mabel was she was a renowned cook, but she had to scrape and stretch the menu a little bit, if you will. It wasn't a whole lot to eat. Well, anyway, one fella came in and he said, "It was a wonderful meal." He said to Mabel in the kitchen, he said, "I wonder if there's any seconds." And she picked up a public stove and hit him over the head with it. He complained to the management. The management being my grandmother. And my grandmother said, "Well, if you don't like the accommodations here on this, you better move on." He went away, so I didn't know.
Thank you. So New and Fran were especially great storytellers. And while many old stories have certainly been lost through the years, many have also been written down a lot by north of Monadnock. Many of you have probably read. Our loons are always laughing. And Floppy actually wrote a book called More Spit Than Polish, collection of short stories. And more recently, even Wren has written a booklet about Newt's musical biography, Newt Tolman and the Haynes Flute. And in fact, here's Wren, we assume, playing that same Haynes flute, carrying on the tradition. And Stacia and I have written a few stories. And here's Mosquito Bush. This was written by Barry's father, and he and Fran depicted his storytelling through wonderful block prints and drawings with accompanying anecdotes. But when we read these stories, I have to warn you that the art of embellishment didn't escape many Tolman storytellers. But their artistic talents didn't end here. And in addition to Newt's musical legacy and his half-dozen published books, he continued to write prolifically. The Berkshire Eagle, the Boston Globe, the Atlantic Monthly, and others. And as well as carving his linoleum block prints, Fran, and this is interesting, this says that this exhibit was in the concert hall, which is the second floor of the old schoolhouse. Fran also painted signs, and that was a WPA project. He decorated a few walls when he had a chance, a few doors. This is a door in the upstairs of the farmhouse. And Fran was actually the first art director of Yankee Magazine in 1936. And Beth, Newt's first wife, Fran's mother, recognized the value of local art, I guess, and opened up a gift shop, which is hard to see here, but it is there on the front lawn across from the farmhouse. And she also co-authored the country dance book with the renowned square dance scholar Ralph Page. And Beth was the first associate editor of Yankee Magazine in 1936. Yankee Magazine started in 1936. And Janet, Newt's second wife, was not only a fine upland game guy, but a very capable fine arts painter. My favorite. And she gave some painting lessons. And Floppy excelled in bookbinding, framing, and making her confabulations small sculptures from bits and pieces of found objects. And in addition to more spit than polish, she also wrote many stories, poetry, doggerel, that have been collated into a notebook we call her Flopology. With many thanks to Susan Lord, who's here, for collating that and coining its title. So Stace was going to give us a sample of what's in that Flopology. Aren't you? Can you? Sure.
I actually don't think I've seen Flopology.
You haven't seen it, but you know what's in it.
Yeah, but there's a gene in my family for doggerel, and so I'll give you a sample of her doggerel. And this, she wrote this little poem on a big sign on the very first Earth Day in 1970. So she was moved to contribute to saving the planet by writing her doggerel on like big slates and hanging them in the trees on the Tolman Pond Road. So let me think of one. Of all God's creatures, only man throws away the rusted can. Even the retarded rabbit doesn't have this nasty habit.
Here's a couple of Floppy's confabulations. Beautiful little things. And most from this generation also served one way or another in different local and or state government positions. Selectmen, I think both Fran and Newt were selectmen. They put in their stint. Floppy was on the school board treasurer for many years, 40 years in fact. Fran was moderator. I don't know if Newt was ever moderator. Newt, Janet and Fran were all state representatives, and I think Wayland actually was a state representative. And Fran was even clerk of the House in Concord for many years. So it would appear that there wasn't much that Fran and Newt wouldn't tackle, now with the assistance of their wives, and we assume with the encouragement of their mother and father. This is the Francis Wayland Parker quote from the Chicago 1901 school. Everything to help and nothing to hinder. So no story about Tolman Pond is complete without mentioning this guy, Uncle Bill French. And here he is with some friends right here tonight. Clark, where's Clark? This is Clark. Right there. We saw him earlier in the wagon with Floppy. And Uncle Bill French was, according to Barry, he was the real farmer. He was Ma's brother, Ma Tolman's brother. And actually, he was Win French's father, Buddy and Kathy's grandfather. And in addition to his farming skills, he helped out in the ski shop. And equally important, he helped keep the daily chores in check. Here's Bill with Jim the Morgan. He helped to milk the cows and pluck the chickens. And Clark. You used to help Uncle Bill milk the cows. I'm putting Clark on the spot.
1943, the wagon and the horse. Bill and Wayland would go up to the pasture near Paddock's place and moved up the cows in the morning. And that wagon was going by the cabin I was sleeping, and I heard them going up about 7, got out and raced up the hill, and Wayland pulled me into the wagon, and we went up to milk the cows. And they got there, they had the pails and they had the milk cans with them, and in the little shed they had the 3-legged stools. And like clockwork, they took these things and in one motion they would be sitting on the stool with a pail underneath the cow. And the milking, Bill would begin, I was watching Bill milk, and as he was milking, they had this rhythm and there's this sort of thing to his body. Pretty soon the tail on the cow began to arch. And out it came, deadly, all over the back of the cow, all over Bill's legs, and into the bucket. And Bill never missed a beat. The rhythm continued, and then he began to scoop it out. I couldn't really see whether he got it all. Pretty soon the milking was done. The milk was poured into the cans, the tops were put on. We went back to the farm, and it was poured into the cream separator, and threw them off there. The next time I saw that note was that evening in that great big dining hall with this big picture of white milk. And I was looking at this, and I began to look at the room, everybody, and they all looked pretty good. So I drank some milk.
So another chore that Bill helped out with was getting in the cordwood. And these are some early photographs we have of getting in the wood.
This one here, want to remark. Got some foresters and loggers here in this area, in this room. See the sled underneath, and then Dave, have you ever seen that stick that they bent over like that, a couple of them, to hold the logs up? Ever seen anything like that? I never have either. I just saw that the other day, and it really caught my eye.
Okay, here's Bobby Curtis. That's the wood that they burned in the farmhouse in winter. How many cords?
35.
And that's Bobby.
Burning his farm back right there.
That's right. And then they got in the hay. Here's Bobby again, and is that Foster and Frank Upton, I think, in the front.
No, that's fine.
That's Pops? Okay. And then they got in the ice, cutting the ice on Tolman Pond. And then they went skiing after all that work. And Howard Clark is here from Harrisville, who actually skied on the hill. And can you tell us that we're almost done? So can we just continue the ski photos and then we'll close up in
I
person?
never realized that get involved with such a crowd as this was you asked. When we get together at the Harrisville Library, there's probably 30 people.
Oh, well, Mrs. Nelson.
Wow, what the heck is going on here? I told Jane, I said, something must be different. They're having a different situation here, contractor. But anyway, I did ski with New Tolman. And I guess I was probably one of the first local kids that ever was asked to ski on the toe. And it was an old Model A motor, I guess, that ran the ski toe. It was a rope toe. And Newt became a tremendous skier. And the first time I ever saw him come down the hill, he came down going forward and then backwards and forward. And then skis turned up on the whole thing. I had never seen that before. That was really something for us, especially a little kid from Harrisville, you know. And the other thing, I'll make it short because it's so doggone hot. And I didn't realize it's going to be such a wonderful, wonderful presentation, Karen. This is really great. But to make it short, I became quite friendly with Newton and Jan. They invited me to dinner, and they also invited me to ride home in the back of the Rolls Royce with two huge big dogs sitting all over me and licking my face. All I could do was see over the top of they have these glass dividers in the old Rolls Royce, and you couldn't talk unless they slipped them back and forth. Now, you may know, somebody may know more about that than I do. Was it Fran that told stories about the old Rolls Royce? I happen to be in one that seemed to be a lot newer model than what you were exploring here on these pictures anyway. But it seemed like a tremendous car to me, and I was probably 6 or 8 years old. And that's all I can say.
Thank you. And these pretty much speak for themselves. There's Hallie Robinson, Mary Shank's mother, on top of the hill. Yeah. But this is how they used that photograph to make a ski brochure for the Monadnock region.
Karen, there was something funny about that brochure, because my mother didn't ski. She's from Iowa. And I know that Dan and Eleanor, that Frank's wife at that time, were just absolutely gorgeous, had all the gorgeous ski sweaters, and the photographer was to arrive, and they needed more people on the slope, so my mother must have done something with us. We've gone up there, and her picture ended up on
Yeah. Wait a sec, Bren, move over a little bit. Wait,